Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second and final day of the Carceral International Conference for Carceral Geography. I want to start by, again, acknowledging that we meet on the lands of the Wurundjeri people and to acknowledge and pay respects to their elders, past, present, and any with us here today. And to acknowledge that sovereignty was never surrendered, was never given up, was never ceded in this land. And that this conference is really attentive to the sorts of concerns and issues that arise out of living in what remains a settler penal colony. But I wonder, we're really very lucky and grateful to have with us today to begin our penultimate keynote or plenary for the day before we meet with Amanda Porter and Maria Giannakopoulos this evening, to have Indigo Daya join us. Indigo is a survivor, activist, artist, and academic. She draws on her lived experience of madness, child abuse, years of coercive confinement, admissions, and eventually healing outside mainstream services. Indigo has worked with the survivor community and mental health system for over 17 years, including senior roles in advocacy, public policy, reform, education, and peer-delivered programs. She's passionate about reconceptualising mental illness as a meaningful response to being human in a world filled with trauma, inequity, hate, violence, injustice, and climate crisis, and working towards a future where anti-oppressive, creative, and non-pathologizing approaches can enable collective healing. And I just want to say a few words from an incredible piece of writing that Indy published in a special issue last year, this year. Just a few words to give you a sense of what you'll be hearing today, but I don't want to, say too much. As Indigo says in that piece, seclusion and restraint are the psychiatric practices most often considered in the context of confinement. She argues that confinement goes beyond just locked places, describing experiences of epistemic confinement, where people's personal truth can be locked up inside the dominance of biogenetic psychiatric narratives which frame contextual distress as mental illness. And while we assume that psychiatric practice, she writes, has shifted from large old institutions to discrete units within hospitals, human rights violations in contemporary institutions remain common practice, as do serious effects of treatment, homelessness, unemployment, poverty, and social exclusion. I'm going to pass over to you, Indy, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Hello, and hello to everyone who's online. You're all contained in this little camera box thing, so I want to make space for it. And I feel like at the end we should turn the camera around so that people online can see everyone here. Tech guy's not watching. Let's do it quickly now, because I want you all to see as well this beautiful room that we're in, because it's like a flower garden. Everyone wave hello. Hello. Check out the flowers. Okay. That's... Was that bad? Okay, cool. I said non-compliance is in my bones. Thank you for that beautiful introduction, Claire. I could not have written that paper without Claire and Diana's incredible support. I went quite mad during the process of writing that and had a period where I couldn't read, which is really unhelpful when you're trying to write an academic paper, but we got there. Okay, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where we are today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, to acknowledge that this is unceded land. I'd like to acknowledge any First Nations people who might be here with us today. I'm so grateful to be in this space, to be here with all of you, to be part of the conversations that we've been having yesterday. I'm actually feeling a bit tearful. I had such a moving experience on the way home in my Uber last night, which is not normally my experience of going home in an Uber. I was rescued by Diana because my phone went flat, so she booked a car for me, so thank you. And I was thinking about Beirut's and Hoda's extraordinary presentation last night and the films. I feel like I'm going to be thinking about these for a really long time to come. I want to watch them again and do a lot of reflections. And I was thinking really big picture. I was thinking about the messages they want us to hear. I was thinking about complicity in particular, which has been a really sticky, horrible feeling I've had as a survivor working inside the system for 17 years. But I feel guilty, but I think I'm going to let go of that. I also had a very personal kind of private reflection when Beirut was speaking to us about not wanting to be seen as victims, how that's just another stereotype, like the stereotypes around refugees of violence and terrorism. And they're all stereotypes, right? And all of these carceral systems rely on stereotypes and fear to control us. And these sort of victim narratives can be just as bad. And it struck me that in my ongoing struggles with madness, I do the same thing to myself. And I was just thinking about as well from yesterday morning, I was listening on my phone while we set up the art installation, listening to Debbie Kilroy and Tabitha Lean, and feeling solidarity and connectedness and outrage and just, really being with that. But reflecting as well about how much carceral thinking is still woven into me and how much work I've still got to do in decolonising and decarcerating my own thinking, not just about systems, about my thinking as a survivor of abuse and what that means in terms of justice, but also about the shame that I hold in myself around being a survivor of sexual violence, and thinking about shame as a kind of carceral notion, that how I feel drawn to have this need to punish myself for things that actually were done to me, not by me. And that's kind of the carceral state getting into my system too. And I just had this moment driving home, and I feel guilty, I guess, because I want to hold myself to account to be a strong ally, to keep learning, to do the right thing. But I just had this moment where I saw the part of me that I feel is a victim, that I get really angry at. I'm like, stop being a fucking victim and get up. And the part of me that I feel like is a perpetrator and evil and infected by abusers, that I'm ashamed of and I don't want to be in me. And the part of me that tries to be like a strong survivor and fight the system, but doesn't really pay much attention to those two. And I just pictured myself kind of holding them all and saying, we're just human. We're just human. We can just love each other. And it felt really powerful. And I hope that's okay as a thing to take from it. It felt really profound anyhow. And so I just wanted to start there with where I am. So I'm a bit like, I don't know, got the rage and got this strange sense of inclusion. I've been thinking a bit about what would it mean to draw on principles of restorative justice inside of myself, and what might I learn from that in taking knowledge out into systems. Anyhow, I wasn't actually planning to say all that, but that's what happens when you don't write out your speech in advance. These are, sort of introduce yourself a bit, don't you? These are some things that people have said about me during my life. So, getting to know me from the lens of others, from some of the shit that is out there in the world. So up the top, some of the messages I was given as a young girl, as a survivor of abuse and violent bullying, of sexual violence. And this is what we tell people and survivors today still, isn't it? Over on that side, what side's that? Left. Forgive me, I'm mad. I've been called psychotic, lacking insight, manipulative, borderline, non-compliant, mental patient, and a lot more by the system that was supposed to help me because of the sexual violence and the shame and the blame and the lack of support. And that was terribly not helpful. And then in my work over the last 17 years, which Claire spoke about, I've tried so hard working, really tried to work all the way around the mental health system to work out, how do we change this beast? How do we stop the violence? How do we make it be helpful? Where's the best place to be? And so I worked in like peer support within a community organisation. I worked in advocacy in the community sector. I went into the government. I don't know what I'm not. I just think of my naive self about 6 years and go, oh goodness, I went in there like, they just don't understand. Bless her. Anyhow, that was a big hot mess. I left there and worked for VMIAC, our peak body for consumers and survivors, the mental health system. And I thought, oh, I've learned all this horrible stuff from the inside, being in the belly of the beast. I'm going to use it. We're going to do campaigns. We can change the world. That didn't do much either. There was this moment, I was thinking about it last night when we watched the film about whistleblowers, which was extraordinary. And I was thinking about, there was a time when I worked in the department where I actually rang a lawyer to ask about whistleblowing because of what I was hearing about sexual violence in the psych system, because I was going to meetings and having to leave so that I could throw up in the toilets and then have a panic attack on the floor and then wash my face and go back into the meetings and try to be heard over and over and over. And feeling this cannot stand, this cannot stand. And being told, no, you can't, you'll face charges, you can't do anything about this. And so I resigned, because you reach a point, right, where you say, if I stay in this, I already feel complicit. I cannot stay in this with what I have heard and seen. I will not be part of this. I will not take money from this. And I felt when I went to VMIAC that I could lead campaigns, and particularly on this issue of sexual violence in psychiatric hospitals, amongst many other issues. And there was a day I rang a senior producer at the ABC to speak about a story that was really important. And she said to me, that's not newsworthy. The public don't care about psychiatric patients being raped. It's not newsworthy. And I just thought, what do we do? God, even if I'd blown the whistle, nobody cares, because we're mad, because we're serial killers, because we're non-human. They've been really profound learnings for me. Painful learning, still painful even now. I'm just going to tissue my nose, hang on. Feels like angry snot, I think. That'd be a great PhD project, angry snot. Yeah, and so I've become increasingly angry over the years, I think justifiably so, trying to make change and being really ineffective in that. Of course, small things, there's little ripples, they matter. There's lives that we can touch and that matters. There's moments where we can call things out and people will start to see the world slightly differently. Those things all matter, but fundamentally, a young person going into the mental health system, hoping perhaps that someone will hear them and help them. A young person doing that today is going to have pretty much the exact same mountain of shit that I had when I went in there decades ago. Fundamentally, this system does not change. The pull of the status quo is really powerful. And from what I hear, all of these carceral systems are the same, right? And so as I get angrier in my work, these were the kinds of messages that people have said about me. I'm too radical. I'm not safe to hear. I was invited to record a talk for the mental health workforce, and the department viewed it in advance to speak about trauma and seclusion, solitary confinement. And they told me it's not safe for nurses to hear me speak about the impacts of seclusion. It's not safe for them to hear what they did to me, what they did last year to 7,461 human beings. I'm just an activist, and I'm unrealistic. Well, that's okay because I'm psychotic. So, you know, it's tough living with all this stuff, and some of this I kind of own quite proudly. I identify as mad, and some of this just motivates me to be angrier, and it's been quite helpful learning, I think, over recent times to reach a space that I wish I'd reached years ago of recognising actually I do not believe in reform. And maybe I had to go on that journey of trying it every way that I could, and then saying, no, this is a trap. It's a bait, and the lure in it is our hope and our passion. And it just keeps us going around in consultations and projects and meetings and submissions and wasting our time when we should be getting busy tearing down these systems that harm people and growing up things that are different, that are grounded in, what was the words, you know, Debbie and Tabitha were speaking about, love and community and connectedness, where no one would even think for a second to use violence to strip away human rights, would recognise that no one heals, that no one grows, that nothing is improved in our society from the use of violence and stripping away dignity. Anyhow, so I'm going on a bit. I'm only done about 3 slides. I'm getting properly rageful. I wanted to acknowledge as well at the start, I guess, I don't know, something about identity and layers. And I feel like in some ways, I hold so much knowledge and thinking through all these years of being in the system and of working to change it. And also I feel like I know nothing. I feel like such a new learner, and I feel like that's a good place to be, to keep questioning everything and throw stuff out. But, you know, just acknowledging some aspects of my own identity, because I am profoundly imperfect and still learning, and where I'm positioned in things, that I am a white settler, that I identify depending on the time of day as a survivor, victim, and sometimes I feel like a perpetrator. I am mad. I continue sometimes to hear voices or to see visions, to have beliefs that other people think are delusional. I self-injure. There are more days than not that I think about suicide. Although I had the thought the other day that there's something interesting in living with suicidality, in that most days I actually sit down and make a really intentional weighing of the pros and cons of should I die or should I keep living? And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times in my life, I've decided to live. So I often just focus on, still stuck in suicide. And it's like, actually, I keep deciding to live. So that's kind of something. I'm not taking life for granted. Am I going to keep going? Yes, we'll do today and we'll reassess tomorrow. I'm Sis. Oh, were you wanting to come in? Oh, you brought me tissues. That's really nice. I like this conference. Thank you. If anyone else needs a tissue, come and grab one. I'm cisgendered. I've been playing with the idea. Can't find any. If anyone knows something, let me know. I've been playing with the idea around sexual orientation and identity. Is something I've been playing around with this year. I used to identify as lesbian, well, bisexual for a bit, then lesbian. I think a lot of people make that little leap along the way, and then queer, and then asexual briefly. And at the moment, I'm identifying as disoriented. I would really like there to be a D in the LGBTIQA+, because I think I might be stretching metaphors too much, but if you have to orient yourself right, if you think about orienteering, you kind of begin by knowing where north or east is or something, right? And you know the land, and then you find your direction, your place, your orient, what you're moving towards, what attracts you. And I think there's something about having experienced loads and loads of sexual violence that has torn up my landscape of sexuality. My landscape does not feel navigatable to me. And so I am disoriented. I don't know where I am in that space. And so I'm identify as D. So I don't know if that's a thing. I'm making it a thing. I'm an artist. I'm trying to own that. Feels weird. I'm decided I'm going to identify as loud and just own that, as imperfect and as a learner. So sort of that's where I come from. Probably didn't need all that. This is a trigger warning free zone. I've poor Claire, I was talking with Claire, I was like, Claire, don't give me a trigger warning before I talk. And I know that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but I'm so often asked to give a trigger warning before I speak, particularly before I speak about my own story. And my position is I'm not a trigger, I'm not a gun, I'm not a weapon, I'm a place where the bullets hit. None of my rapists had trigger warnings on them. The cops didn't have trigger warnings on them when they turned up at my door and dragged me out. The psychiatrists who drugged me, the nurses who locked me up, they didn't come with trigger warnings. My story is not, I'm not going to put a trigger warning on my truth. I'm really uncomfortable with trigger warnings. And I think trigger warnings give us a message. Firstly, about they misdirect us on where the threat is. And they tell us to not listen to the things that are uncomfortable. And we turn away from actually the sources of violence. I think there's a real problem with that. I think they're also, it's psychiatric thinking, which I'm not comfortable with either. You know, it tells us to focus on our vulnerability and to be safe. And I'm not comfortable with that. But also I think it drives us to be silent, to say, oh, trigger warning, content warning, I better turn away. I better be quiet. We better not speak about the thing. Oh, microphone. We better not speak about things that are triggering. And so trigger warnings, I think, push us into silence. And I think that is a much more dangerous thing than speaking about things that feel uncomfortable. I think we should feel really uncomfortable. I think we should feel really unsafe because we're not safe. None of us are safe from psychiatry, from prisons, from police. We're not. And so we can't look away. And so that's, I know there are other views and I'm not averse to having a debate, but that's tripping over my pants. I'm not a fan of trigger warnings, so that's why you haven't got one. So not sorry about that. This is me. When I speak about my madness and trauma, this is the image that I'm holding. This is me at 13. This is me when I'd already experienced the impacts of intergenerational trauma. On my mum's side, she was put in an institution for pregnant teenagers and forced to adopt her baby at 15. My dad was sent away by his mother and raised by a violent relative. There was a whole lot of Holocaust trauma on my dad's side of the family as well that I was raised in when I was quite young. And then we separated from that part of the family. But, you know, one of my earliest memories is learning about the concentration camps and about the evil that people can do. And so I hold that, it's in my bones, I think. And also the message that I was told by, I remember so many card games of elderly relatives talking about the war, but also playing cards and all the small change. And people telling me you must never be silent. And I think that really stuck. And I'm grateful for that lesson, to not be silent. But so those things had shaped me in early years. There was a lot of violence in my home growing up. There was a lot of neglect and my mother disappearing. I was bullied in those early years, beaten up. And I got to the point where it got too painful and I ran away from home. And unfortunately, I was abducted, held for 2 weeks, horrible sexual violence. And then I was told to never speak about it. My abuser said, don't tell anyone or I'll go to jail, while we were locked in the back of a divvy van together. My mother, when she came to pick me up from the police station, said, don't tell anyone what happened. I hadn't told her what happened. I hadn't told the police what happened, but she must have known, right? I still ask myself this question all the time. And she's dead now. I can't know. I tried to have this conversation with her at the end of her life, and she said, no, I can't speak about this like this. And so, you know, that's some of the stuff that drives you mad, really drives you mad, I think. Don't tell anyone what happened. Don't ever speak about it. And so I didn't for 27 years of my life. I got no support. Instead, I got a delightful social worker because the police had threatened to lock me in Loughnan, which was a horrible old girls' home, for being a delinquent, for running away from home and wasting police time. My social worker would drive me to Loughnan and show me the fences and tell me stories of girls who died trying to escape and how lucky I was and I should be a good girl. Well, that's where I was going. So he was a right prick. Anyhow, these are the things that we do for survivors. Yeah, so I'm not surprised when I look at all of that I ended up going quite mad. I'm kind of surprised it took me so long that I made it to 30 before it really exploded. And so when I'm mad, I'm this version of me. And I had a different name back then. I changed my name when I was about 32. So I was born, I was called Samantha or Shoshana. And I think about her and I think about what she went through and how no one heard her and a lot of people hurt her. So just kind of honouring her really. And I guess, you know, it'd be nice if we all honour the parts of ourselves that have been hurt and the times we've said no and no one listened and the ways we've tried to navigate these spaces, to feel okay in the world and reached out for help but not been able to find it. So I'm obviously talking about carceral psychiatry today and the paper that Claire spoke about, Russian dolls and epistemic crit. So I wanted to reflect on that a little bit. I use the metaphor of Russian dolls quite intentionally. It kind of really struck me the way, and I imagine many institutions are like this too, not just psychiatric hospitals, that there's these layers of increasing control as you move into the institution. So there's the outer hospital, and then there's the psych unit, which is locked. And then within that is the high dependency unit, which is locked with a bigger door. And you've got less things in there and you're watched even more. And then within that is the seclusion room where there is just nothing. There's just whiteness and no space and a tiny window that people watch you through and a wall to smash your head into. I guess that's, and in each of these spaces, they get smaller, but so does our humanity. And it's such a grotesqueness, I think, that these institutions claim to be offering care. And yet this is what they do. There is no way any human being's mental health, not that I particularly like that term, but there's no way that any human being's mental health, well-being, emotional state improves in that kind of environment. When we strip away humanity, we go more mad. Certainly I did. So this is a typical seclusion room. This is a seclusion room in Indigo in Victoria. So some of them do have like an ensuite toilet, but I believe most, there's actually no publicly available audit of all of these rooms. So, and they vary hugely. I've seen a great many of them in my work with the department. People would be quite proud when I'd visit a service to show me their seclusion rooms and their ECT suites, which was quite disturbing, but I felt it was important to look, don't look away, see what is in each of these spaces. And so there's often a cardboard bedpan on the floor, which is, you know, undignified and also incredibly inaccessible. Often a few paper cups of water, a mattress usually on the floor, and that's about it. And mechanical restraints are still in common use, and physical restraint is really common as well. These aren't the only forms of violence, but I think they're the most commonly seen, the most easily recognisable violent practices in psychiatry. And so they're really important to focus on. But I'm not sure that they're always the most violent. I've spent a lot of time focusing on these things over the years. This is from a report. I've done 2 of these for VMIAC. I put out a seclusion report last year that got data looking at seclusion and restraint in psychiatric hospitals across Victoria, because the Victorian government doesn't publish most of the data on this. It's not transparent. So we were able to get more data than you normally do, but they actually refused to give us a whole lot of really important information. But we got more than we've normally seen. And one of those things was the actual number of times this happened, because that's never in their reports. And so this, I always like to include this slide now. This is 7,461 tearful emojis. And I just put that in there to hold a space for each of the people who experienced this. That was part of the report. Sad, of course, that the only thing we've gotten out of reform around seclusion is a commitment to probably eliminate most of it in 10 years. And if it takes you, in my view, if it takes you 10 years to do anything, then you actually have no intent of doing it. That gives you enough time for multiple government changes to come up with lots of reasons why it's not actually feasible. You know, that they could do this in a year if they wanted to. We've also seen when this report was released, the first media response from psychiatric nurses was to have a story that says, "Who's advocating for us?" That was the response from the system. So I don't put any faith in, even when we have a recommendation from a Royal Commission to eliminate this, I don't have any faith that's going to happen. The processes that I've seen are profoundly tokenistic and not engaging with what's actually going on. These are some of my own experiences of violence in psychiatry. And again, some of the more obvious things, but are important to name because these are all really common. To be dragged out of your home by the police, including one time when I was half naked and not even stopping to allow me to dress myself, to be locked up, to be strip searched. And I was so moved yesterday when Debbie Kilroy spoke about this as state-sanctioned sexual violence. I don't know why I'd not heard anyone say that before. And I just thought, yes, it absolutely is. How is any place still doing this? To be sedated, to have, as you would have seen, if you've seen my art piece downstairs, it does my head in how often the system will, if we're suicidal or they think that we're suicidal or a bit too mad or a lot too mad, that they'll station a security guard at our bed while we're in emergency departments because that keeps things safe. It does not feel safe to have a security guard at the end of your bed. It feels really, really bloody threatening. And it's one of those just ludicrous things where I'm convinced that the act of putting the security guard there makes it so much more likely that we do things that reinforce the idea that we're not safe because, you panic and you try to get away. Being constantly observed, being stitched without anaesthetic. The demand for compliance is, for me, a really gravely wrong conceptual issue in mental health, given the huge volume of survivors in the system who've experienced sexual violence, and understanding that at the heart of that is a lack of consent. To take those survivors who've had consent stolen from them and say, you must comply, you must go along with whatever it is that we want to do to your body, shows the most profound ignorance in relation to the impacts of trauma and to ideas of justice. It's astonishing to me that this is still really common practice and a common way of thinking, and that it's not even hidden. That psychiatrists will say to us, you need to demonstrate compliance. You need to be more compliant. You need to be a good girl. You need to do what you're told. You need to be obedient and submissive. This also does not lead to good mental health, surprisingly. Solitary confinement and forced treatment. So more than half of people who use the public mental health system in Victoria experience compulsory treatment. So there is no choice in that. If we were able to measure how many people are coerced without being under a formal order, I reckon it would be a hell of a lot higher. And if we then think about just the impact of the implication force, knowing that even if no one's not actually threatened you, because I've had both. I had compulsory treatment, but I did have a year of being forcibly injected with antipsychotics every 2 weeks. And I was told, if you don't agree to do this, we'll put you on a community treatment order. And I didn't know enough about my rights really at that point. That just sounded terrifying to me. If someone said that to me today, I'd say, bring it. I'm calling 16 lawyers and 10 advocates. Like, no, but I just was like, oh my God, okay. And went along with that and was zombified for a year of my life. Just so drugged. That year I was so heavily drugged. That happens to lots of people still. And there's lots of other people who just say yes because they're so frightened of what might happen if they don't. And so I don't think anyone actually consents in this system. While compulsion exists, there's no such thing as being voluntary. So in my paper, can I do a time check? I feel like I'm rabbiting on a lot. Is this boring? Is this like freaking you out? No. Oh, fine. Okay, cool. My paper, I talked about epistemic injustice, and I think you were actually there on the day I first, were you there on the day I first learned about, I think you were on the day I first learned about the concept of epistemic injustice. It was only a few years ago, I feel. We were talking, I think you were there. There was a group, I was talking with a group of people outside the Social Equity Institute on Grattan Street, and someone talked about epistemic injustice. And I'm like, what's that? I don't know those words. And they explained it. And I was like, oh my God, that's that thing that I know. And I didn't know it had a name. And that's it's exciting, isn't it? It felt really exciting to me to go, oh, there's a name for that thing that's doing my head in. And it was. And then I was like, I've got to go read Miranda Fricker. I've got to go read more people. That was really, really important for me in my thinking. And so I was trying to draw on that in that paper. And I'd suspect most folks here probably have a better understanding of epistemic injustice than I do. But in case it's a newer concept for anyone, it's my simplified thinking is it's this idea that you're not heard or believed because of your identity, and that that's the sort of testimonial injustice and the hermeneutical injustice when there's no shared ideas or words to make sense of your experiences because of your identity. And so, for me, in terms of madness and trauma, I wasn't heard when I spoke about what was going on for me because I was mad. I couldn't be believed. When I spoke about what I needed, what I wanted, I couldn't be believed because I was psychotic or borderline or whatever the label was of the day. I had about 8 or 9 diagnoses over my 9 years in psychiatry. But also, I didn't have the language always. I still don't for some of my experiences. I didn't have the language to express what was actually happening or to make sense of things. And this psychiatric system that actually damn well should have the language because they're working with thousands and thousands of us who have these traumatic experiences. They didn't have any useful concepts or language to share either. And so we grab onto what's there, right? In my early days, I was like, I have a serious mental illness. There's something broken with my brain. I will never work again. I'm really sick. I have to take my medication because I didn't know anything else. And there was that bit of me going, but what about that thing that happened when you're 13? But it's not helping, but I feel really scared. But the only language I had was the pathologizing language. So these are matters of epistemic injustice, when knowledge becomes a form of oppression. And I talk in the paper about epistemic crypts. And I speak about that concept in relation to diagnosis. And so I put forward this idea that confinement doesn't just happen in places, in buildings and in forced treatment, in seclusion and restraints. It also happens in terms of knowledge and truth. And I think for me, the denial of my own truth, that perhaps I was not someone with a diseased brain, perhaps I was someone having a perfectly normal reaction to really extreme violence, and in a world, and having been silenced for decades, perhaps that's how you're supposed to react when that kind of stuff happens to you. The fact that all of that was denied to me was a form of epistemic injustice. It was another form of violence. And the reason I use the language of a crypt was because my truth died there for a time. Rose up again. I didn't mean, like, don't do a religious metaphor. I was like, oh, no, what's happening? But it went into a coma for a long time, perhaps. And labels like being a schizophrenic and being a borderline are so sticky and disgusting. They obscure everything about you when you have those labels. They're really opaque, and they're damaging in different ways, but I think, equally harmful. In the early years, there was a short bit where I had depression, which as my label, which was hard but not so impactful. But when you get a schizophrenia diagnosis, it's just like, oh my God, can't tell people about that. That led to so much force, so much paternalism, because, you poor mad thing, you can't possibly know what's best for you. We're going to make all your decisions and do everything for you. So a lot of force, a lot of being locked in, but a lot of exclusion and fear by people in my community, because schizophrenics and psychotics are serial killers, right? So all of that kind of stuff. And then as my self-injury grew and grew, because it was actually really helpful to me, and that's not something that the system seems to be able to recognise. In fact, only 2 days ago, someone on Twitter reported me for writing about self-injury, and Twitter sent me a very unhelpful email to let me know that a concerned citizen cares about me. Not enough to actually speak to me, only to report me. And then I might like to call a crisis line or contact a professional for help, which I would not like to do. Anyhow, self-injury, that almost automatically gets you a borderline label. And that's kind of the opposite effect. So instead of being locked in over and over and over, you get locked out. So you ask for help and they're like, no, we don't want anything to do with you. It's this horrible, bad, mad and bad dichotomy that are both awful, yeah? And so you get locked out, and there wasn't so much at the time, but increasingly really ugly rhetoric in the community about people with this label. In the UK, and we have, I think we have shadows of this happening here, people with a borderline label have been increasingly criminalised. I don't know if people have heard about the Serenity Integrated Monitoring, the SIM program that's been technically shut down, but I'm not sure that it has in the UK. But if you haven't, look up SIM, Serenity Integrated Monitoring, where the police and psychiatry got together. It's like the start of a really awful joke that you don't want to hear the punchline on, right? Police and psychiatry thought they managed these people who reach out for help too often and are actually wasting resources in systems by criminalising them, so that if you ask for help too often, you actually get charged. So asking for help is an offence. And so people have died because of this, because those people were asking for help because they needed help, they wanted help. And instead, the carceral system reached out its fist. Terrible. And so these labels are, often people compare, there's sometimes like a kind of hierarchy or class system around psychiatric labels, which is really problematic, I think. They all have a level of toxicity. They all, I think, serve a function. I know some people really struggle with this idea as well. You don't have to agree with me, but I really do welcome conversations. But I think psychiatric labels are really problematic in obscuring the truth of what we experience in the world. And for me, that's been very much trauma, but it can be equally true if you're experiencing hate from racism or transphobia or homophobia, or the impacts of years and years of poverty and inequity and marginalisation in communities. None of these things that impact us in the world, like being a young person and watching the climate crisis unfold and seeing no future, we're supposed to get distressed by that stuff because it's distressing. It doesn't mean that we're ill. There's nothing wrong with our brains. There's something wrong with the world. And so I think this is an epistemic crypt that we need to tear down. I don't remember why that slide's there. It's a bit creepy, so we'll move on. something creative must have occurred to me, but I've lost it. I'm not sure I've got much time to talk about this, but this was a art project. Felt so moving. Again, I wasn't sure. Feel still really tentative that I've been stepping out back into my art project, art practice that I'd kind of abandoned for many years, and I'm finding healing and connection and space for the things that don't have words. Feels epistemically just to be using arts practice at the moment, which I'm really enjoying, but also struggling with I'm not a proper artist stuff, and then trying to go, stop it. But Slice Silence was a project that I had as part of the Big Anxiety Festival. And the tagline on that, which is a bit hard to read, says, "Cutting through the silencing of self-injury, trauma and injustice." And it was not terribly complicated. I made a whole lot of art cushions, changing the world with throw pillows. Didn't know it was possible. A whole lot of cushions that I painted, decorated, remade, made from scratch in different ways. Each one of them had a story about trauma. It wasn't always obvious to people, but they did to me. They each had a history of pain, trauma, injustice, and self-injury, that they were all injured in some way. And they're also blank ones. And people were invited into the space to interact with the cushions in any way they wanted. So this was very hard to get through an OHS community, but I had knives available so that people could cut the cushions if they wanted to. It was about 6 rounds of fighting the system to get. I was like, it'll be okay. Everyone already has knives at home. The world's not going to end. And probably in a show about self-injury, some people coming might have knives in their pockets already. Seriously, it'll be okay. And it was okay, of course it was. So there were knives if people wanted to cut the cushions. There were bandages and needles and threads if people wanted to tend to the cushions. There were fabric markers if people wanted to write on them or tattoo the cushions. People were invited to hold them, to speak to them. And so some people were really interactive with each other and talking about it while we did it. Other people would take cushions and sit off very privately on one of the windowsills and interact with them. And we did this over 2 days with a couple of conversation circles. It was so beautiful. It's really beautiful. This was, can't remember why I put this slide in, but this is a close-up of the wax cushion, which was kind of deliciously gross. It just had covered with layers and layers of wax representing scabs so that you could just pick them off. It was incredibly popular. I think this might be a kind of self-injury that many people use, but we're not supposed to talk about. And people would just be like, I just have the scab cushion. Really enjoyed the wax cushion. So go home and cover a cushion in wax if you like. It is quite a comforting cushion. That's why it was here. This is one of the messages that I had in the space, because it was really trying to take a stand against silencing as being one of the most harmful things that we do to people, which is part of what I think psychiatric diagnoses do. They silence us, they silence our truth. And so the message I gave people is that you don't need to cover your scars in this space. That's something we're frequently told if you self-injure, that the idea of contagion, that our scars are contagious. Our distress is contagious to people. We don't just have a disease in our brains, we are a disease. My existence is a contagious disease. And so we should cover up so that people aren't affected. It's like a trigger warning made even bigger, And it's really interesting to me that as a young girl, I was told to dress properly so that men weren't tempted to rape me. And then with the impacts of sexual violence, when I self-injured, I was told to cover up so that it didn't have a horrible impact to other people. Like always the problem's located in my body. What is that? We know what that is. That's the patriarchy. Anyhow, so I really wanted to give the message that you don't have to hide here. You don't have to censor your words. You don't have to hide your body, that all of you is really, really welcome, whatever it is that you bring. And I just felt like a relief. It was really lovely to offer a space like that, because those spaces are not available to us. This was just a shot for, this was one of the windowsills. The cushion with the hole was I was trying to make an inside out cushion, because often when I dissociate, I live on the inside of my skin. I feel like I don't have an outside, but I'm kind of crawling, it sounds a bit weird, I know. I'm crawling around on the inside of my body. So I was trying to represent that in a cushion, but it didn't really work. This was a cushion, just reflecting on, it says words. I'm not sure if it's clear, but it's the absence of words. I think often that's something, one of the many functions self-injury can fulfill for us. When there is no words, we can express our pain, our search for meaning in a different way with our bodies. That was another cushion. These were the kind of principles I tried to hold in the space, being absolutely anti-oppressive, coercion-free. And that was a tension as well, particularly because I had knives. I was talking about self-injury. There were no clinicians in the space. There was pressure, right, to have safety plans and risk management, to decide what I was going to do if someone got really distressed, or what if someone self-injures, all these kinds of things that might go wrong. And I kept resisting that. And so I had signs up that said things like self-determined safety. You know what's safe for you. If there's something that anything that I can offer that helps it feel more safe, please talk to me. And I would make that offer. I was not going to put myself in that position of these carceral systems of deciding what is best for someone else, because that's where we go off the rails. And so, but it was hard, even doing an art project outside of the health system, to hold that line. People were like, will you give a trigger warning? So, it will be, thank you. I won't give a trigger warning. So that was challenging. I did end up doing some flyers with trigger warnings on it that had information about crisis services. So I felt it was appropriate to give a trigger warning saying, if you call a crisis service, there's a chance they might trace your call, send the police to your door, take you to a psychiatric institution where you may be locked up, stripped, tied down, forcibly drugged, lose your freedom, lose your house, lose your children. So you should know about that. But if you find it helpful, go ahead and call. So that was interesting. Unhiding, this idea of truth speaking about trauma and justice. So that one of the things I offered in the space was, this is a place where we can say the things that we know it's not safe to say anywhere else. Not that other people think are not safe, that we know if we say them, someone's going to do things to us that we don't want. In this space, no one's going to do that to you. That it was about a kind of peer collective. It was about peer support, but it was informal. It was really emancipatory. It was not the increasingly co-opted yuck that we're seeing with peer work in the clinical system, which is very concerning. And it was creative, which I think felt really important. It was not art therapy. I'm not an art therapist. I don't want to do art therapy. It's about using art as a tool, as another kind of language, as a place to connect, as a way to co-create together. As a site for healing, but also for activism and speech. So they were the kind of principles. This is a cushion. I only have this one messy photo. On day one, a person came in and said, I want to cut a cushion. Can I cut a cushion? I'm like, absolutely you can. And she said, can you stay with me while I do it? I was like, absolutely I can. And so we stayed there together, and they cut sort of slow, and then they just did more and more and more and more. And then, until it looked like that. There was just all the stuffing falling out everywhere. And they sat there, they're out this big breath. I said, thank you so much. And then they left. I was like, cool. It's like, man, that cushion is trashed. Should I throw it out? I was like, no, it's part of the space. So I left it in the corner. So this happened. And then on day two, a young woman came in and saw that cushion and said, can I heal that? That was this one. I was like, do you reckon you can? It looks pretty trash to me. And she said, nothing's beyond healing. I might have these words slightly wrong, but this was the essence. Nothing is beyond healing with enough time, care and patience. And she sat there for over an hour and a half and stitched this thing back together. It was freaking extraordinary. It was, people were just like, wow, it's really calm. And this woman was a survivor as well. she held a lot. And I was thinking, wow, I wonder, you know, what is it that, I don't know, it's another one of those things perhaps that defies words, but thinking about what this extraordinary young woman saw and just thought, I can heal that and I'm going to and I want to, and did that, was beautiful. I'm not even quite sure why, but it was beautiful. And I was so happy to have been able to make this space where we could all do this together. And there was something really powerful as well in the co-creation of that one person ripped it to shreds and another person pulled it back together. And I'm really curious, like I'm hoping to continue this project. What happens if we can do these things over time and come together in different ways, with our experiences of trauma and injustice and madness, and draw on creativity and connection and see what happens. It felt really special. And I adore this cushion so much. It's really lovely to run your hands over all the stitches. She used almost an entire reel of cotton to do it. Oh, that's a bit rude. I thought I should say something. I wasn't quite sure about the piece downstairs. If you haven't seen, I've got a hospital gown hanging in space. That's called What the Fuck Are You Looking At? You can put your own punctuation and intonation on that, whatever way that you like. There are a couple of close-up shots. And that was a gown that I stole from an ED. I have a large collection of stolen items from psychiatric hospitals and emergency departments over the years. And it's something I'm really, I want to honour the younger me that did that, because I think that was a way of grabbing some power when there was very little available to me in those situations. And it's something I've seen again and again, whether I've been in peer support, advocacy, friendships with people, is I'm blown away by the creativity that we have as humans to find power when it seems that none is available. We shouldn't have to. Doesn't make it okay. This is not a little nice anecdote. I stole things, so that makes it okay. It's not okay that I felt so powerless I had to steal things, but I'm quite pleased that I did steal things. And each time something happened that felt really awful. You know, one example I can think of is not being given a pad when my period came and I was in hospital. And you have these, you know, pale mint-green pajamas, so you really want something, right? And I had to wait over 4 hours before they'd give me a pad. And so I was stealing stationery from the nurse's station instead, I'm glad that I did that. So I have my supplies, and the gown is one of those things. And it's probably a comment on a lot more than what I've thought about and written about, I suspect. But what came to mind to me, it's just another one of these awful practices that is not unique to psychiatry. We see it in all of these carceral systems of observation, of watching, and there's a violence in that watching that's, I think, often feels hard to understand when you're experiencing it, I think, but it's, you know, it's a demonstration of control. It's a potential for more violence to come. It's horrible to be watched all the time. And that experience for me of, I've never understood why so often when I would go to an emergency department, you would have to put on a hospital gown, even if there was nothing physically going on for you at all. What possible function does that serve except to make you feel more exposed? You know, the system is just so stuck in its ridiculousness that we have to wear a hospital gown, and that wearing a hospital gown with a security guard was a really common experience I had that was always terrifying. So there was that. And the other thing held in it was just wondering, what is it that mental health nurses think they're going to see while they're of value, while they're doing these constant observations? Sometimes we're under constant observation. Sometimes we're on 15-minute obs. And so they'll come and they'll cite us and they'll write down what we're doing and how they think we're feeling, as if you could know. And there's ideas, right, in psychonursing practice that if you're agitated, it's a problem. If you're settled, these are ways you describe a toddler, right? If you're settled, then you're pretty safe. And I think on that as well, that so they observe behaviours. And I think that's just nonsense, because some of the times I would have appeared most settled was because I had really calmly decided, yeah, this is the time that I am checking out of here. And I'd put a suicide plan into action. And I was feeling really calm with that. And other times when I appeared agitated, I was actually working really hard to hang in there. I was marching around and trying to move and trying to stay in my body, and might have looked a bit mad, but actually I was doing what I needed to do. And so just how silly these things are, and how none of them speak at all to what's actually going on internally for us right now, but also in the world, in our history, in our lives, in our communities, and in our relationships. And the idea that you can just go and look at a body and know what's important about someone's mental health is so nonsensical. So anyhow, it's a play on that. It's quite hard. It was harder than you might think to work out how to get a hospital gown to suspend in space the way you want it to. Didn't expect it to be quite so challenging. But that's it. I forgot to work out some really profound thing to say at the end. So I normally try to do that, but I forgot to do that. So I'm just going to say thank you so much. I don't know if that formed any kind of coherent thing, but I'm really grateful.
Thank you, Indy. That was so powerful. And I think, that was a real testament to your work and your speech and your not being silent. So thank you. I just want to open it to anyone who wants to pose a question or a comment or a reflection or anything. I mean, it's hard to know what to say, what words one can say after that. Thank you, but we welcome any comments or reflections. Thanks, Daya. And I'll repeat it to the microphone.
It's a thought and maybe a question. Thank you so much, Indy. Thank you. I learned a word last week, recently, and I wanted to put it to you as a way to kind of connect what you're talking about, the violence of it's called nosology, naming, like diagnosing, giving things a name, and how that contains and blocks out experience. And the word was drapetomania. Have you heard of this word?
I have.
Yes. So this was a 19th century US medic who came up with this pathology to describe what slaves do when they try and run away. So I just said, and I just wanted to, just came into my mind. I thought that's the history, that's the connection. Often we talk about, how the patriarchy and racial capitalist context is sort of abstract terms connected and underpins everything we're talking about. But that to me is a really direct example of what you're talking about. Then so crazy how we pathologise normal, perfectly normal reactions to crazy world, crazy making. It's fine to
Issues being delivered around.
I want to repeat that.
I'll repeat some of that if I miss. And for those who are online, there's a lot of stuff happening in here at the moment that needs tissues, and it's not snot. It could be. I'll try and repeat what Diana said, which is, what was the word? Was it drapetomania? Drapetomania, which is a word that emerged during the slave trade when people were trying to escape from slavery. And it was a way of describing what would be normal behaviour, trying to escape from that violence, but putting a name on it, which actually reduces it, pathologizes it. Is that I kind of captured it? Yep. And did you want to reflect on that?
Yeah, it's horrific to imagine, isn't it? And my view is that psychiatric diagnoses continue to serve that function in society. They take issues that are socio-political and call them biogenetic. They take an issue that's happening in the world and they locate it in the people who have to survive the shit of it. And it serves colonialism, it serves the patriarchy, it serves capitalism, it serves everyone who's got power for the people who experience discomforting impacts of the abuse of power to say, well, you're just crazy, but we'll care for you, we'll look after you. It doesn't serve us. And that's not to say, of course, that we don't, of course we want help to cope with the pain, the anguish, the despair, the scary voices, the panic attacks. I'm not saying that distress is not real. It's very real and really painful. But that system doesn't serve us with that. It serves to shut us up so that the people who've got the power can continue to exert it in the ways that they want. And that's really problematic, as long as we keep talking about brain chemistry and biology and genetics and not the real issues happening in the world that drive us mad. Yeah. And drapetomania is disgusting. It's the other one I was thinking of. I might say this wrong. I think neurasthenia, something like that. There's a whole variety of horrific historical and contemporary diagnoses, but I think neurasthenia was when women get distressed because they think too much. I've so got neurasthenia. Thank you.
It's another question here. Shall I move? Oh, and thank you. And yes.
Should we have a
Thank
look?
you so
Take
much.
one from online.
Yes.
Hello, people online. Oh. Thanks, Teresa's just saying nice things about me. That's really nice. What's Mark?
We should read it out.
Don't want to feel uncomfortable.
No.
What's Mark saying? Thank you so much. When we think of abolition, we're encouraged to imagine what the transformation, not reform, could look like. When you think of transforming care responses that are not violent, could you share what this might look like for you and for community? Thank you, Mark. I think I said two things. There's what it might look like for me, I think, is not necessarily what it will look like for all of community. One of the concepts I like to draw on, it sounds like I'm being flippant, but I'm really not, is the idea of a buffet. So something we often hear in, not just in mental health, also in disability and healthcare more generally, is, best practice and models of care and evidence-based practice. And that's all crap, right? Because what they always land with is one way that we're going to respond to everyone who looks like they fit this box, and we're going to do that thing to everyone. And there is not a single practice in the mental health field where the evidence says that's helpful for everyone. None of them. And so when you say we're going to do evidence-based practice, it means we're going to force everyone into the same box. And if it doesn't fit too bad, we're just going to force you harder. So that's crap. So I like to think of a buffet, because there are people who actually value biomedical interventions. And I feel really uncomfortable with that, but I think I'd be being an asshole if I said, well, we should just get rid of it all. I think we have to get rid of the institutions, the violence, the force, and the supremacy of medical diagnosis and that stuff. But we should all be able to do whatever it is that we find helpful. Like, what I'm really interested in is choice. And part of that choice is informed consent. So being offered the idea that, well, actually psychiatric diagnoses are just a theoretical construct grounded in colonialism and patriarchy. But, they're there on the buffet if you find them helpful. But there's also a whole lot of other stuff on the buffet. And we can be with you to find what it is that's going to be right for you. And that might be different tomorrow and different tonight and different to yesterday and different to next year. And that's perfectly okay. So that's one thing. And another thing I think is that I don't like the language of mental health, because I don't think my experiences are a health problem in the way that we understand health. I think it's social and political, and it's certainly not just mental. That's just so narrowing. And so I don't think these experiences belong to the health system. I think as a society, we've done a grave error in thinking that medicine owns human experiences of distress. That's ludicrous. It belongs to everyone, it belongs to community, to you, to me, to all of us. And so pulling these experiences out of health system and having different spaces that are actually grounded in socio-political thinking would be really important. For me, stuff like creativity, I find activism, it's curious that the louder and more truthful I am, the harder it can be to retain employment. But although other opportunities arise if you just keep moving around. But the better it is for my distress, the more honest I am, the stronger I am feeling in myself. And so for me, activism is one of the most healing things that I can do, and with being with other survivors. Yeah, so, but I think it's hugely varied, and we have to make space for much more creative thinking that's led by community. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cindy. And we've got any other questions online?
Yes, no.
Yeah, and then we'll go.
Third, Indy, you mentioned the healing within the community you've done since escaping the mental health care carcerality system. Would you be able to share where people should seek this if they think they would find this helpful too, please? Love you. Oh, good. There's not a place. I think I've had some really bad luck, obviously, but I've had some really good luck as well. And I didn't talk about that very much today, and perhaps I should have. But, you know, earlier in my career, I heard Ron Coleman speak, who's a voice hearer from the UK, who'd also spent many years in the psychiatric system and was part of the Hearing Voices movement. And Ron became a good friend, and his wife, Karen Taylor, who's a legend. And through that relationship, I ended up being one of the people who co-founded the Hearing Voices network in Victoria. So I think the Hearing Voices network, I know not everyone hears voices, but that was a really important early place for me to get exposed to different explanatory frameworks, to connect with consumers, survivors, voice hearers who thought about things differently. There's something quite wonderful sitting in a Hearing Voices support group, because lots of us have unusual beliefs at different times, right? And the idea of the group being that we are going to hold everyone's truth as mattering. And so we can have you'll never hear so many multiple truths held so beautifully and wonderfully as in a Hearing Voices group. Lots and lots of wild and wonderful things that are meaningful, that are there for a reason, and making space for that. So things like Hearing Voices community, and through that I got to meet, I got introduced to the psychiatric survivor movement and meeting many other survivors. But I think it doesn't exist. I think there are individuals offering different alternatives. But at the moment, I don't think we really have much. I feel awful saying that, but that's part of the injustice, right? We can say, oh, this system's awful. Be really careful going there. But actually, if you're losing your shit, you're really distressed, well, where else are you going to go? It's not. And so a lot of people will go there still for help, knowing it's awful, because there's nowhere else. And it's really scary to be mad or suicidal. So that's an injustice as well. One of the exciting step for me in leaving all my jobs with the mental health system is that I'm putting my energy now into growing alternatives that are completely disconnected from the health system. I don't want to touch the health system because I think it just ends up corrupting things. I want something really different, grounded with survivors and community. I've got no capital, no resources, no funders or whatever. I'm trying to find my way about how to do stuff, but I'm really interested in being a part. I think we have to do it ourselves. If we keep asking the system to get better, we'll just keep getting what we always got. They don't want to change. If they wanted to change, they would have done it already. So that sucks, but also we have to do it.
Maybe we should call it the disease system.
Yeah, we can call it the disease system. What we need is some hackers to steal their funding so we can create the buffet.
I've got another question up here. Do you mind me turning this around, people, just for sound, or do you not want to be on? If anyone's concerned, just let me know. And I'll repeat the question just in case it doesn't.
During the presentation, you spoke about when you started to regain your power, when you started stealing hospital gowns. Can you please elaborate on that journey of finding your personal power to your potential to where you are now?
Shall we repeat that?
Okay, so the question was do you want to repeat it or?
Yeah, I'm happy to have a go. So I talked about stealing the hospital gown and other things as a part of gaining power and on my path to healing. And can I elaborate more on that path to healing and what else there might have been? There's been, I think, thousands of things. I don't think there's ever been just one thing. And the other thing I'd say up front is that I use the word healing. I'm still not always sure what I mean by that. I'm certainly not recovered or healed. I exist in, how I am. Sometimes seem to be doing quite well this morning, so that's a bonus. Some days are just awful still. Last year I had a suicide attempt. I was seeing visions of my abusers walking across the lounge room and sitting into my body, which is awful. So I'm not there, but yet, what would I say? What is different? Engage in the world differently, I think. I understand my experiences differently. I don't expect them to go away because what happened to me can't go away, right? I could go and get more of those delightful shock treatments and maybe all my memories would go away, but I'm not going to do that. And so I can't take away the hurt, but I keep trying to find different ways to live with it, to navigate and to make sense of it differently. So the hearing voices approach was really helpful for me. And a few other things that were helpful with power. A lot of years back after I got out of psychiatry, so lying to psychiatry was really helpful for me. I had to get coaching from some people, but I did a fake recovery plan and you have to pitch it just right. You have to make yourself a bit vulnerable and not quite sure. So you can't just suddenly go, oh, the medication's great, so thanks so much, because they know that you're lying. You can say, I think maybe it's starting to have an impact. And then you go, could you help me remember to take my pills because I forget sometimes. Here's some ideas I had. Do you think they're any good? Which is awful, right? Dirty, horrible, blur. But that was quite effective. And not everyone's willing to do that. And I really respect that. People are like, I'm not going to lie, I shouldn't have to lie. But I did, and it got me free. And so that was helpful. And I did graffiti at the hospital on my way out, so that was good. And 5 years later, there was still a trace, which was excellent. I saw a sexual assault counsellor. That's not always helpful for people. It was for me in that first experience because she taught me about grooming and I didn't know what grooming was, and I really needed to understand grooming. I needed to understand Stockholm syndrome. I needed to understand that a whole lot of physical experiences I have in my body are really common for survivors. Some of that is stuff I need to continually hear because I lose that because it's hard, the impacts in my body that continue from that child abuse. So that was knowledge was really helpful. Learning about the psychiatric survivor movement felt really powerful because I just felt connected then. Like psychiatry makes you really isolated. They even discourage us. They discourage us from forming friendships. It's not healthy, with other patients. But actually my friendships with mad people are the best friendships that you can have. Activism and truth speaking, even when it's come at a big cost, it's worth it. And I think art for me, that's sort of part of coming back to art has been recognising this sort of comes from the power threat meaning framework. It's been really helpful for me in the last year. The ways that power, patriarchy are meshed in with language. And so sometimes it's impossible to find words for our experiences because no one talks about them much. Sometimes it just kind of feels intentional, like, language doesn't exist to help people who've experienced violence and oppression navigate through that. And so we have to create new language. And I find art really powerful for when there's no words to still express. So sometimes I feel really powerful when I make like dance playlists, like of songs that are popular on TikTok, and I dance in front of my cat to them, but that's just embarrassing. But I feel powerful as a fat mad woman trying to do TikTok dances in my lounge room, like, but I can't do that. I'm trying to learn how to do it. Yeah.
Thanks so much. We're just how
We're done?
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got more questions. Should we, everyone happy for? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Indigo.
Hello.
Wonderful. Allow me to strength. I've said through many of these sessions, very, yeah, it's very, gives me a lot of strength myself. I'm a gay man of asylum seeker. It's a similar experiences from South Sexual abuse. Fascinated with seeking asylum in Australia after spending years in jails. And I would say, yeah, don't have a lot of trust in systems and institutions that protect me. And sorry, I'm rambling a bit because the Western medication is kicking 2 hours later, and English is the fifth language, so I'm translating here. I think my question is, how do I draw out the strength, in me as a young person looking at you? How do I draw out that strength in me to empower myself, to advocate for the students? And how do I share that space with others?
Should we, how do you repeat that?
I'll repeat the question bit first, which is how, make sure I got that right. How do I draw the strength to advocate for and with my community, with my lived experience and with my community? And Manu, share, is it okay to share some of your experiences? Yeah, shared lived experience as a refugee, as a survivor of child abuse. And Manu speaks 5 languages, and I'm just like blown away by that. I don't know, Manu. I worry sometimes about the idea of strength, like, because I don't feel strong, right? I feel fragile as all hell. And I frequently am, like, I can go out and do stuff and I'm like, oh, I did a keynote, or I can go and yell stuff on Twitter or make some art. But then I'll spend days lying on my couch staring at the wall, like talking to myself. And I do that as well, and I feel really weak. And so maybe part of it is recognizing that we can be many things at once. Because I'm not sure if it's strength. I feel like for me, it's not strength, it's a commitment to truth, to speak truth, and it's continually working to be connected with other survivors. There's no way I would be here if it wasn't for my network of friends who are survivors and who can hear, particularly, you know, some close people who can be with me or hear me no matter how freaky I might be. So I think connection, none of us do this stuff alone. That sounds like a slogan, but it's true. Yeah, I don't know if that's helpful. I feel like I didn't really answer, but I'm not sure that I know. Don't be afraid to speak the truth and do it anyway. Also, like, we should catch up for a cuppa and a hug. Let's be connected and we can be some strength for each other.
Thanks. We had another question from Julia and someone else.
I've had so many times so fucking moved in this way, listening to you, and English is not my native language. And I was like, I just came home from Frankfurt to fall in love with you, actually. So
I love you too.
I'm so glad the camera is not me, but
We can change that.
Yeah. And I actually wanted to ask you about transparency, as you were clear about how violence is created, or how margins are created where violence is like channeled through how they are. Criminalization, pathologization, needs, and then I just listened to you and I kind of
I'm glad. That's cool. So we should do a hug because it sounds like we're having a love affair later. Sorry, but let's try anyway.
So Julie is just really appreciating coming all the way from Frankfurt to fall in love with Indy. And I can't remember the question after.
I'd already answered the question. Yeah.
Someone else, I think. Yes. Hi.
Hey, Pam.
Martin.
mental health system, carceral system of some people, and I was wondering if there are like particular things that you resources or things and ways that you might have that conversation that you
About
people about it, to try to convince people that sometimes the challenge is to be trusting and human beings. Yeah. Sorry.
yeah.
A little French.
You guys are asking really good questions that are really hard to answer, which is good. Like questions should be like that. So Pan, for people online, Pan was asking about, I'll make sure I got this right, about other resources, materials, info we can share with people to talk about abolition, the carceral state in the psychiatric space, because people are so the dominant psychiatric narrative is kind of everywhere, isn't it? Sort of ubiquitous, and most people haven't been exposed. So is that right, to this kind of thinking? I think about that stuff a lot. I don't have anything handy. I try to create things in as part of what I try to do in my social media and my artwork and talks like today, is try to create some resources. But I think we need tons more. I think psychiatric survivor space is so often behind. We're really behind other rights movements that started at similar times. I think we're really behind in the abolitionist space. And there'll be reasons for that. And I wonder if epistemic crypts is one of the reasons, that there's something about when we speak out, when we become critical, it's so easy for the system to dismiss me simply by saying she's borderline, she's schizophrenic, discredited. Easy, you know, that's how diagnoses function. And so, you know, it's hard for all of us in different systems to fight back, but our words are not believed. And I think the other thing is that people in distress want help, which is reasonable, right? And even with the shitty system that we have, it's really hard to get help from that system. And so you're not really wanting to hear in that space that, oh, don't get that, it's awful. So you're like, are you kidding? I'm just trying to survive here. And so I don't know. There's something too about, doesn't always sit well with me to, I don't want to go around and convince people that what they believe is wrong, because I don't want to be like the system. So I think it's about, you know, offering different narratives, and all of us who can do that, putting it out there so that there's at least more of it. But I feel like the real answer will come in alternatives. So when I think about myself, I was, you know, I believed all of that pathologizing narrative about me in the early days, because there was no other alternative narrative. There was no other, it wasn't until I started to experience, oh, I can dialogue with my scary voice. I can go through an experience of putting myself on trial and listening to what my voice has to say. And, you know, I can do all these different creative things that are helpful. Until I'd experienced that stuff as being helpful, I would have thought it was just nonsense. And so I think we have to grow up the alternatives, lots of them, the buffet, so that people start to experience things other than drugs. And then those people will speak about those things as well. So I think we're so early in this space. Like, I'd really just like to go tear down some walls later if you want to. But I think we're a long way, really long way from actual abolition and from there being many actual alternatives. Even, you know, in Victoria, our Mental Health Commission recommended kind of half of, you know, partial bit of something that we'd asked for, which was to have we wanted a survivor-led alternative service, like a place to go in crisis that was non-pathologizing, no use of force, where we could support each other. And they came out instead with a lived experience delivered. So not survivors, not owned by, but delivered by us, which means, so it's under the governance of a hospital and a community organisation. And the government's really, you know, and there's lots of people fighting really hard to make this service be good, to hold to the dream. But I don't see how it's possible, actually, when a psychiatric service is involved with the governance. They're not, their fears of risk are going to come into play. Their narrow thinking is going to come into play. And it's going to end up looking like, at best, a prevention and recovery service with more peer workers, some of which are very medicalised, I think. And so even when we try to grow alternatives in the system, they get corrupted. So I think there's a lot of work, and I don't really know, growing the alternatives, doing what we can. Sorry, it feels like a really piss weekend, so can. Does anyone else have an answer?
I actually think we're starting to do the work here now, like the fact that there's, and there are people already doing this work well outside of this conference, and you know them, Indy, and others here know them, but to shine a light on places that are typically thought of as places of care, actually places of control that run along a kind of continuum of violence, is the start of acknowledging that these are not just, you know, places for health and care, that there's other stuff happening.
Yeah.
Anyway, before I call for it, wonderful thanks for India. You might want to read another message to you on the chat. I just want to ask you to, to have a look at the art program downstairs, the wonderful sculptural piece by Indigo Daya, the wonderful photographs taken and selected by Dave McDonald on the Loud Fences campaign, resisting institutional cover-ups around violence and abuse in Verticals care homes, churches, and the amazing historical materials organised and cared for by Bree Carlton relating to the Fairly Women's protest, prison protest. So do have a look at those downstairs. And I want to also, I was so flat out yesterday and so tired, I really needed to give a shout out to the amazing senior curator at Cultural and Collections here at the University of Melbourne, Jackie Doughty. I think I pronounced his name properly. Jackie did an amazing job from Cultural and Collections, pulling that together, and some of you would have seen that being put up on site yesterday, and she's worked tirelessly over recent weeks and months to present that in the form that we have it today. So thanks so much to Jackie as well. And now thanks to Indy for
Thanks, everyone.